Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're peeling back the historical and demographic layers of Scotland to understand exactly how we know what we know about its people. We're going to look at the fascinating ways we track human footprints across time, using everything from modern digital data to literal footprints out in the Highlands.
So, what exactly can a modern national census and a rugged, boots-on-the-ground archaeological survey of a famous glen tell us about the hidden lives of the Scottish people? Well, it turns out quite a bit. The answer lies in how perfectly the data pieces together a massive, cross-century puzzle.
Part 1, Scotland's Changing Voices and Uncovering Modern Demographics.
Let's kick off this detective story at the macro level, 1.5 million. That's the staggering number of people who reported speaking Scots in the 2011 census. It's a massive figure that completely shifts the way we might assume everyone communicates across the country. And the data goes even deeper than that. Another 267,000 people said they could understand Scots, even if they couldn't speak or write it. When you break down the overall linguistic landscape, the dominance of English is pretty obvious, right? 5.1 million speakers. But right alongside it, you've got this incredibly robust Scots-speaking population. And then, taking up a much smaller slice, a declining Gaelic minority of just over 57,000 speakers, which is a drop from previous censuses. This data paints a really clear quantitative picture of Scotland's modern voices.
But here's the thing, these historical languages aren't just surviving in textbooks. They're living, breathing parts of specific geographic pockets. About 1.1% of adults speak Scots at home, heavily concentrated up in places like the Shetland Islands, Aberdeenshire, Moray, and Orkney. It really shows us exactly where history is still speaking today.
Moving on to Part 2, Beyond the Glencoe Massacre and the 1996 Archaeological Survey. Let's zoom in now from those broad national statistics down to a very specific, incredibly rugged piece of land in the Scottish Highlands. Back in 1996, an archaeological survey set out to prove that this 13,000-acre National Trust property in Glencoe holds a complex, everyday history far beyond its infamous 1692 tragedy. As the researchers themselves pointed out, the everyday historic elements are hardly recognized by laymen and are so much more than just the massacre of Glencoe. They wanted to uncover the lives of the everyday working people.
Just imagine facing that dramatic, sweeping landscape looking east from Loch Actracton. The archaeologists had a massive, almost intimidating task ahead of them. How do you uncover the hidden lives of the everyday people who farmed and worked in those vast glens? Finding the faint traces of a lost community or the subtle foundations of old turf-built structures in a landscape that wild is literally like looking for a needle in a giant rocky haystack. To pull this off, they relied on a solid three-step method: a desk-based historical review, a rigorous ground survey, and meticulous database recording. And get this, modern GPS was totally useless to them. Back in 1996, the tech just couldn't handle the mountainous terrain when they tried to plot the sites back at base. So they had to go old school. We're talking compass bearings and actually pacing out the length and breadths of features with a known pace length to locate these ruined sites. Part 3. Mapping the Hidden Past, the detective story. This is where the detective work gets really fascinating. The contrast in historical record-keeping is just wild. You have the rough, almost abstract sketches of Ponce's 1590 map compared to the incredibly precise 1755 military survey by Roy. That level of detail in Roy's map actually gave the 1996 team a much clearer roadmap of where settlements and extensive rig cultivations used to be. And here is the golden thread connecting our present to the past. Remember how we just used the 2011 census to digitally track language pockets? Well, those 1996 archaeologists relied on paper census from the 1840s and 60s to track historic inhabitants. Those fragile paper records mapping out everyday occupations were the absolute key to understanding who actually populated the glen before it emptied out. This data translates directly into specific human livelihoods. We aren't just plotting abstract dots. We're pinpointing the exact spots where shepherds, farmers, and slate quarriers lived and worked across the glen. By diving into those mid-19th century records, we literally see specific families and their trades preserved right there in census ink.
Part 4, The Great Sheep Shift and a Massive Economic Upheaval.
The timeline of this era reveals a truly heartbreaking shift. Back in 1693, slate quarries were successfully established at Ballachulish, supporting local families.
But jump to the late 1700s, and there's this devastating transition from traditional cattle husbandry to a massive influx of black-faced sheep farming. By 1790, the economic upheaval was so severe that emigration boats were leaving for North Carolina. Families were essentially forced to cross the ocean.
The crucial takeaway here boils down to one staggering number: 25,000. By the 1790s, there were 25,000 sheep in the neighboring parishes of Lismore and Appin alone. 25,000. They were literally consuming the land. The historical sources note that these massive sheep farms were expanding daily simply because they were far more profitable for the landlords than the black cattle or grain grown by the local tenants. Records from the Statistical Account of Scotland describe a tragic, and I quote, rage for emigration, as rents skyrocketed and those highly destructive black-faced sheep took over the original vegetation of the glens. One account matter-of-factly notes preparations for another ship for North Carolina, leaving late in the autumn of 1789. That was the single voyage where around 200 people left their ancient homeland behind forever. Ultimately, all that remains of those once bustling farming communities are dry stone foundations. The 1996 data meticulously captures what remains of places like Actreocton, a house with an attached outhouse of dry stone construction. It perfectly preserves the faint physical footprints of a completely lost way of life, effectively turning scattered rocks back into a deeply human story. Which leaves us with a pretty profound mystery to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. What will future demographers and archaeologists infer about our lives from the footprints and census data we leave behind today? When they eventually dig through our digital records or ground survey our abandoned buildings, what hidden layers of our modern lives will they uncover? Definitely something to think about the next time you fill out a form or walk past a ruined wall.